what the donor wants you to present in specific sections. There is also a checklist for self-guidance. This is something that's for you or use only. You don't need to attach this checklist when submitting the concept note. Actually, it says really here in the first row that you're to delete this checklist before submitting your concept note. It includes a couple of issues that you're supposed to check, verify before submitting concept notes so that you don't make some administrative mistakes, like perhaps proposing duration that is below or above the minimum and maximum prescribed in the guidelines, or that you had actually attached all the documents that are needed. Currently, this is only this concept note. Plus, you will see at the end of the concept note, you will see that there is declaration by the lead applicant, and you're to sign this before submitting the concept note. This declaration, you will notice, is signed only by the lead applicant. Actually, in this particular template, and it has been like that in the past as well, the co-applicants are not signing the concept note, which is why it happens sometimes that when you reach the stage of preparing full application forms, you suddenly it's revealed to you that these co-applicants, your partners, I mean, it happened in the past. I'm not saying that it's going to be the case here, but just to let you know, suddenly they say, oh, we don't actually want to take part in this project, we don't want to participate in this project, and then all of a sudden you're in problem, because you're supposed to keep the same partnership as proposed in the concept notes when presenting the full application form as well. I mentioned this yesterday, but just to mention this once again. And it's not really difficult for these partners to actually give up sort of from this partnership, because as I mentioned, they don't sign anything in this stage of proposal. So I would always recommend that you have these mandates from the full application forms actually signed before submitting concept notes. Of course, perhaps you're working with some co-applicants that you know very well and you trust, and this issue then is a non-issue for you. But in case you're working with some perhaps new organizations that you haven't worked in the past, it's always a good idea to actually secure these signed documents that you will be needing for the full application forms, even at the stage of concept notes preparation. No one is going to ask you to submit them, as I said, but just to make sure that these organizations do indeed actually want to sign on the projects that they are involved in. It also happens, on the other hand, that some organizations dream of having, some partners, and then they just mention them in the concept notes, and then at later stage, it's revealed that these people had never been contacted, had never been involved in the preparation. And then again, this is an issue that's a problematic issue, because according to guidelines, you're meant to replace your partner only in specific exceptional cases, such as perhaps bankruptcy, or like disappearance of an organization or something like that, but nothing more than that. Concept note itself is so to speak divided into, let's say, three main parts. The first one is the summary of the action. It's a table that's completed. Then there is description of the action, and then there is relevance of the action. And in relevance of the action, you have a couple of questions that are asked, and we will go through all these questions today using the instructions. And also, perhaps if you started working on these concept notes, maybe you have some, as I said, specific questions and so on. So this is the document that's to be completed and then submitted via prospect, and that's how the first step of the submission process works. Other than that, you're supposed to register in Pador, and due to that, you will have to upload certain documents there. But formally speaking, there is nothing else that you're submitting in this stage of the application. Let's go back then, perhaps, to the presentation. Yeah, please follow the format and instructions. It doesn't really mean that you can't perhaps insert a subheading, another one, if you'd like to present and highlight something that's not presented currently in the concept note. But don't delete the questions, don't delete the titles and the subtitles that are currently presented in the concept note. There should be precise, specific. I mean, it's easy to say, difficult to go by, because sometimes it's difficult to present your intentions and your objectives and your project simply using 5 pages, but this is how the European Commission works in these circumstances. They also do not really want to have people spending a lot of resources and time preparing these concept notes, and the reason why these two phases of application process exist is simply because of that, so that we have a possibility to actually receive information on the intentions and basic fundamental information on the actions, and then select further based on that fundamental information, so that organizations do not have to invest a lot of resources, prepare lengthy projects, and then only learn that they are not going to be awarded a grant. Coherence, this is something that I always emphasize when dealing with similar circumstances. Always use same terms throughout the text. Sometimes you have this situation where in the beginning, let's perhaps go back to the template now. In the beginning, you mention, for example, that your objectives are linked to a certain issue, and you mention a certain wording, and then when presenting description of the action, you mention something else. It loses, I mean, in this case, the document loses on the coherence. I guess the most frequent case where this happens is like perhaps in your target group or beneficiary presentation, in this little table in the beginning, you mentioned that you will have, let's say, 42 participants of a certain activity, and then later on when presenting further, all of a sudden it's like 35. Sometimes it happens that these concept notes are developed, it's a process, and then perhaps the table is filled in first, and then as a result of discussions between partners, or as a result of some contextual questions and issues, all of a sudden you don't have the same activities that you had planned in the beginning, but then you forget to delete those couple of activities in the table in the first section, and then whomever is reading this considers, so but this is a bit contradictory, there is a certain list of activities here, and then later on in the text another activity is missing. So this is why I think that it's hugely important to always highlight and emphasize this coherence issue, so that you have the same terminology, same titles, same names, same notions, same information throughout these 5 pages that you will prepare. Because if you don't, all of a sudden it's a minus. Those people reading your concept notes consider that there is a contradiction. You may be, of course, asked to clarify certain issues, but none of the clarification should actually lead to the increase of quality of your proposal, of the concept notes you submitted. So it's always a good idea before submitting. Try to read it once again and try to see if there is any information that's kind of like in contradiction with other information that's presented in the concept note, and then change this, and then send this information further, send this concept note further. I saw briefly that there was question. There are a couple of questions. I hope that you can hear me well. I don't know what's with the sound. I think that yesterday it was working. In terms of recordings of yesterday, yeah, they will be uploaded on our webpage. But as I mentioned yesterday, it takes a little bit of time to turn this recording that we receive from Zoom as an output of the meeting into a proper video that can be uploaded on the internet, and it will happen in a couple of days. Can I refer to specific municipalities which we are planning to involve during the project process in the target groups? I mean, theoretically speaking, yes, you can, but just please try to see if these municipalities are in fact your target group, or perhaps they are not a target group but stakeholders under the project. It can be different in different circumstances. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't be a target group. I'm just saying that sometimes people get these two issues mixed. Sometimes we're talking about a stakeholder and refer to them as target groups. Gantt chart can be designed and can be included in the concept note, but then bear in mind again that it's not requested currently. Actually, something similar to a Gantt chart will be requested at later stage, in full application form stage. In this particular moment in concept note, you're only requested to present brief information on activities, explaining when they start and they end, perhaps months they start, they end. If this can be briefly presented in the concept note, if there is sufficient space, you can include a simple Gantt chart. I wouldn't recommend developing a full Gantt chart and including it in the concept note, because I'm sure that it will be more than a page and a half. And as I said, you only have 5 pages, and in the description of the action where you're actually supposed to present your activities and only briefly present the timetable of activities as well, there's only maximum 2 pages that are supposed to be used for these particular issues. So it's possible, it can be included if you think that this is going to increase the quality of your concept note. Yeah, by all means, but try to make a simple chart and a small kind of like size chart that doesn't take up a lot of space. As I said already, we discussed a little bit about this yesterday. Quotes, tables, illustrations, anything that you think can help visualize the intentions presented, the project presented, the relevance of the project in particular, because this is something that's the most important part of the concept note, the relevance of the action and its presentation. Please use it. There are certain technical rules, 2 centimeter margins, Arial 10 font, single line spacing. This is what the instructions are saying. I've never seen in my life that because someone hasn't actually used Arial, their concept note was rejected, but I mean, it's an instruction that's presented in the template. So so please also use this as well. And as we mentioned earlier, your project will be judged, will be evaluated, will be assessed solely on the basis of this concept note. You may decide to submit additional information, photos, studies, research, statements from people, but they will not be taken into account when assessing, because that wouldn't be that wouldn't be considered equal compared to other projects. And so please make sure that everything that you would like people to know about your intentions in the project and all important details that you believe are, like speaking for you, making your case, are actually presented in the concept note. Yeah, so these are some technical details. Let's see, perhaps if there are some additional questions. Now we can move on with the presentation. In summary table, this is the beginning of the concept. No, this is the first page. This is this little table which I mentioned. It's a beginning of your project presentation. So I would like to emphasize, and I think that this is hugely important. Try to be clear in the summary table to like extent possible, precise, quantify everything. For example, let's open this part of the document. It says objectives of the action, target groups, final beneficiaries, estimated outputs, main activities. It looks really simple. It's only a couple of lines, but as I said, it's always better for an evaluator, I'm speaking now from experience, to see that these people, they do know actually, okay, they want to have 25 participants at a certain training, or they've actually listed clearly or all their target groups. There are some easy things that you can do to increase the way the presentation looks like. Please use numbering when presenting activities. Don't just simply go and list activities, saying project monitoring, management, capacity building, etc., but number them. Also, please number all your objectives. When we are talking about the objectives of the action and estimated outputs, it's actually those terms we mentioned yesterday: impact, outcomes, and then outputs. As I said, this is something that when whomever is reading your project, assessing your project in particular, this is the first information that they enter, that they see, and therefore it really has to be clearly well structured and organized, and speak of the project to the extent possible, but I would say fully, so that whomever is reading this says, okay, now I understand this project. Sometimes, especially I would say in civil society, because the issues that we're dealing with are well, social, and it's not linear, it's not simple, it's very complex sometimes. Sometimes people tend to be overly narrative. So you can see that when listing target groups, or when listing outputs and objectives, everything is in there, entire society as a whole, then these and those communities, and then everything else. I understand that intention, I fully understand it, as I said, because some of the social issues that are dealt within these projects are complex as such, but then again, try to also at the end understand that someone needs to read this and understand your project, and then if it is overly complex, it may be a problem for people to understand it and to understand your intentions. So I mentioned this yesterday, but I'll mention it again. Keep your specific objectives to, let's say, 3. Don't take this formally. If you need to have 4 objectives, it's fine, but I mean, don't have like 10 specific objectives presented in this table, because immediately whomever is assessing this project will get lost. In terms of target groups, try to quantify. To say, when I say quantify, actually mean, number the participants, number the project, people that are supposed to benefit from the project, present them in numbers. There is a question on specific objectives. As I said, I wouldn't recommend more than 3 specific objectives. I'm not saying that this is a rule. It's not written anywhere. No concept note will be rejected because of that. But if you can, you know, limit yourself to 3 specific objectives, that would be good. And how do you number outputs? It can be an abbreviation. Let's say output 1. Or it can be simply 1, or perhaps if you would like to make a connection with outcomes, and then perhaps one outcome will, you know, be linked to 3 particular outputs. You can use also 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3. So it's there are no rules, but I mean these 3 ways are the most common ways of numbering the outputs. When it comes to outcomes, that will be like outcome 1, or perhaps you would just use simple numbers, you know, like 1, 2, 3, etc. Usually you don't really number impact because, as we mentioned yesterday, it's only one impact. It's only one overall object. And then also activities. Some people number activities using this kind of like numbering option. Sometimes they tend to present activities through components. So maybe there is like a component A and then 3 activities within this component A. So that would be one option. Another simple option is just to use numbers again, and or perhaps if there are certain sub-activities, let's say, let's just give an example, like maybe activity capacity building, and then you will have an activity 1.1, which says like training 6. So that's another option of presenting and numbering. I'm not saying that if you know, number your activities and outputs and outcomes, that your projects will be immediately regarded as the best. But some people are, you know, always looking into kind of structures when they're assessing these concept notes. And the reason why this numbering is important is not like the most important thing in the world, of course, but it's later on when you're presenting your activities. You don't really have to then go and, you know, like say activity 1, capacity building, but you can just mention number. You don't have to use the name, and that saves time sometimes as well, especially in the cases where you have a lot of activities, and where the names of these activities are you know, lengthy. But if an output impacts more than one outcome, in this case, if you have an output that is linked with more than one outcome, or another way around, if you have, you know, if perhaps there are 2 outcomes and they're producing 1 output, I would then recommend that you use simple numbering, that you don't try to present this internal logic through using this you know, like A1 or 1.1 or something like that, but just number them, simply saying outcome 1, output 1. And then later on, when explaining in the design of the action, you will explain these linkages, you will explain your intervention logic. if that answers your question. So just use the simple numbering then in this case. Yeah, okay, let's go back to the presentation. Quantify whenever possible. I already mentioned this, but it's not only about numbering, it's also about you know, percentages, numbers of participants, and so on and so forth, so that it's clear what your intentions are. You know, it's always better to say we will train 25 people than to say we will train a certain amount of people. If you're clear as to what number of people you want to train, then it gives a little bit more quality into your, you know, original planning. I'm mentioning training often in this presentation, even though, of course, the list of activities that can be presented here is much more than trainings. So you don't think that, you know, you have to have trainings in your projects. It's not the case, but it's just something that comes to my mind when I'm trying to illustrate what I'm talking about. But it can be a number of policy papers. You can say we will work on policy planning, or you can say we will develop 4 policy documents. And there is a certain difference between these two statements. In the statement number 2, you actually clarify that number of your policy papers you want to develop on the project is 4, and perhaps you also want to mention what would be the sectors that they will be covering, and then it's much clearer for the whomever is evaluating this to understand what your intentions are. Description of the action is your first kind of like the text that you enter. In the concept note, you see clearly here in the document, it says cover all the 5 points from the instructions. Let's go to instructions, and through these 5 points, they are explained here and also in my presentation, so it's more or less the same information. The instructions are asking you to give the background to preparation of the action, to explain the objectives of the action as presented in section 1.1 in this little summary table which we discussed, to present key stakeholder groups, their attitudes towards the action and any consultations held. You remember yesterday that we had a couple of slides on stakeholder analysis. This is the reason why we had these couple of slides, because in your description of the actions, you actually asked to present these key stakeholder groups, briefly outline intervention logic, including outputs, outcomes, and impact, as well as underline the main risks and assumptions. To go back to yesterday, this is the reason why I discussed a little bit about result-based management as a topic, because this intervention logic is coming from the log frame approach, and as you see, this is only one question in the concept notes. You're not, as we discussed yesterday, you're not really requested to draft and develop and submit a log frame, but it's better if you do have it prepared alongside your concept notes, and then it will be easier, I guess, to answer this particular question. And then you're to briefly outline the type of activities proposed, including any relationships between activity clusters, and then to explain how you will mainstream relevant cross-cutting issues, which are listed here: good governance, support to youth, children's rights, human rights, etc. So we have this list of issues that is presented here in the instruction. First 5 are related to the first question asked here. Maximum 2 pages, as I said. No one is actually going to, like, go into the document and say, okay, these people, they use 3 pages instead of 2. So it's not really likely that your concept notes will be rejected if you don't follow these maximum instructions, because the template allows it. But you know, like, I mean, don't overreact it. Don't have 5 pages explaining your description of the action. It's like maybe you need a couple of more lines, but not more than that. Do you have maybe any questions? Um, yeah, I read the questions. You don't have to now say, you know, exactly the number of participants at the conference, but if you're planning a conference, give an indication. Is this going to be a, you know, a conference of international character or of a regional character? Um, Try to, in a couple of sentences, present this conference by saying whether it will have like 50 participants or 100 participants. Uh, substantial information between the concept notes and full application form shouldn't differ. It should be more or less the same. It means like if your overall objective deals with social inclusion and your specific objectives deal with social inclusion, you cannot at full application form all of a sudden switch to, let's say, environment protection. For example, I'm just illustrating. But maybe in the concept notes you mentioned, oh, I want to have a conference for 100 people, and then at later stage you were invited to submit a full application form, and then all of a sudden you realize, it will not actually be 100, it will be around 70. We don't really have a budget for 100 people. It's okay. You can present this change at later stage. You can say originally we thought the conference will have 100 people, but now we're proposing 70. And even when your projects start, there could be a case, you know, like, look at us now. We cannot have a conference, you know, like other than online in most countries and in most circumstances. So modifications are possible even during the implementation of the action. So I would always say that you do, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, do present your intentions, mention the number of participants, but also keep in mind that, I mean, it's not like written in stone, it's not going to be, it can be changed at later stage. It's just an indication, you know, whether you want to, when you say medium scale, it doesn't have to mean the same to you know, different people. For me, medium scale conference could be a conference with 20 participants. For another person, it could be like a conference for 50 participants. For someone, it could mean like a 1 day thing. For someone else, it could mean like a 5 day thing. People have different experiences. So then it's better to say, okay, it's going to be a 2 day conference. For example, I'm just giving an example, 50 people participating, 4 guest speakers from such and such countries, and so on and so forth. And our intention is to have such and such number of people attending. To answer, I mean, to answer the second part of your question, as part of project deliverables, you are planning to publish a technical report, an academic book. You don't need to at this stage refer to which publication service you're planning to use. But if you're planning to publish scientific journals in some magazines, in some journals, you can maybe indicate which journals you'll target to publish your articles, and if you're thinking of or you can maybe indicate, you know, number of pages when it comes to an academic book. But if I understood you correctly, and I think that, I mean, my understanding is that you're saying who's going to be the printing service. You don't have to mention this now in the concept notes at all, no, because I mean, the concept note is only to present your main intentions and your main activities within the project. And you don't really need to estimate date of publication as to, to say, oh, it will be published on 27 August 2020, but you can say, for example, that you're planning to spend 5 months on preparation of these documents, and that they will be published tentatively in month 6 or month 8 of the project, and so on. In terms of dates, always something which is recommended, especially when we are dealing with this description of the action. Don't mention May 2021, July 2023, and so on and so forth, because we can't be certain that your projects will actually start as intended in was June 2021. So instead of using calendar months, always use project months, month 1, month 2, month 3 of the project. Or perhaps if you're planning for a longer term project, year 1 of the project, year 2 of the project, and so on and so forth. Because very often it happens that plans do not actually work, that like you're thinking, okay, we may start in June, and then this and this will happen in July, but then the donor actually needs a little bit of more time to assess your project, and then they don't start in July but in September, and the entire action plan falls under the bridge, so to speak, because you have to change it fully. So don't mention calendar months, and don't plan as to like thinking that for certain in this calendar month you will undertake this and that activity. It's important for those organizations that are linked with like perhaps school calendars, school curricula, and so on, that they would like to target students while they're not on leave, while they're not on school holidays. Sometimes these intentions cannot work because assessment processes take longer than planned. And then there was another question of a person working for a university. You cannot really apply on behalf of the university. If I maybe misunderstood you, university has to apply, So you will maybe be applying as an individual or something else, but you cannot apply on behalf of another institution. That institution needs to send an application, and in that case, all other rules need to be respected, such as there is a person authorized to sign on behalf of the university. Such and such person would be signing the concept note and would be submitting the concept note, etc., etc. Okay, we can maybe go back to the presentation. When presenting the background to the action, when in this area of description of the action, in this section of the concept note, try to focus on key challenges, and not only challenges that are like common sense, known, and do not necessarily relate to your concept note as such. Sometimes you have these presentations, such and such territory is really underdeveloped, and their GDPs and isn't this and that, and number of companies working in the area is this and that, and then later on you learn that this project proposal has nothing to do with companies. So why waste, like space? I mean, why present then some challenges that are not really relevant for your proposal? When they say focus on key challenges, these would be the key challenges that are relevant for the proposal that you're presenting, as well as key issues. If there were any studies or analysis, there were some people who mentioned yesterday, I think, that the research has been done in the past, and now they would like to move on with a similar, like a continuation of that research will take place in this proposal. Mention them because it gives an indication. It supports your claim to start with. If you're saying, okay, key issues are these and these, but then there was a study made and such finding was revealed in that study. But of course, if there are any studies, research, documents that you are referring to, please also use references so that it's clear as to what you're referring to. Fortunately, I mean, at least in that aspect, you're living also in the world where internet is now, giving a lot of documents, and then you don't really have to use classical referencing. If you found some information online, you can also use, like links to present where the information was found. Um, in terms of presenting your intervention logic, if this is easier for you, you can list your outputs, outcomes, and impact in a table, and then perhaps use, like a table explaining, okay, these are my, this is my impact, my outcomes, my outputs, and then in the following column, perhaps explain what is the linkage between them and why you are proposing them, not just simply to repeat the information from the summary table, which was already presented, which is already presented in the concept note. Sorry, yeah, for a minute. I was reading. You're planning to recruit long-term monitoring campaign to measure the thermal performance of buildings. Okay. Is it necessary to mention what type of buildings are planning to be measured? It would be. It would be good to mention this, because you don't really expect that everyone who will be reading your concept note understands everything about thermal performance of buildings. So when presenting your intentions, also bear in mind that it's better to use thinking, okay, I'm writing for an average newspaper reader than to an expert, because sometimes things are really require an expertise to be understood, and then maybe it's better to use like a simple language. So I mean, if I were you, I would mention what type of buildings are planning to be measured to try to explain what my intentions are and what I want to do. But I can't really give you an advice as to, yes or no. It's really up to you. As I said, whatever you think would help you, would help you in the scoring at the end of the day, and for your concept notes to achieve higher scores. How many monitoring equipments are required for this campaign? I don't know, but if you're asking about, do you need to explain monitoring equipment in the main activities section? Yeah, I mean, it would be good also to explain what type of equipment you want to purchase, you're planning to purchase. Then to move on with the description of the action, you should only briefly explain activities proposed, including the description of linkages, relationships between activity clusters. So when they say activity clusters, they actually mean components of your action. Maybe you will have under your project a certain component that deals with monitoring. Maybe there will be a certain component that deals with capacity building. And then there will be maybe a certain component dealing with communication and visibility or stakeholder involvement or something similar. And then you'll try to explain in your concept notes what is the linkage between them, how they relate one to another. And then describe key stakeholder groups. As I said, always it's better to actually not only analyze stakeholders as they say using armchair approach, from your armchair, but try to have consultations with them prior to submission of the concept notes. Once you've identified them, it's useful because they may tell you, these stakeholders, the representatives of these stakeholders may tell you very important information. Maybe someone's already doing something that you're now proposing, or maybe someone is doing something similar and you want to cooperate with them. And if these consultations are held, then also mention this in your concept notes, that you had consultations with your stakeholders, that you verified their positive attitudes. I'm hoping that they're positive, of course, at a certain meeting or similar. And then finally, you should explain how the action will mainstream relevant cross-cutting issues. These cross-cutting issues are listed in the template itself. They are listed on this slide. I will not repeat them, of course, but try to be specific also when explaining how your action will mainstream these cross-cutting issues. I've seen numerous concept notes where people are saying our action will be environmentally friendly, and then full stop. What does this actually mean? I mean, like a simple illustration would help. We will not use such and such paper, or we will not publish books, but only online publications. I don't know, something similar to that. You can't really just go and have a claim and say we will be environmentally friendly, and then say nothing as to how this is going to be operationalized in your actions and in your concept notes. So that's an advice also when trying to answer this mainstreaming of cross-cutting issues. Try to say how is this actually going to be done. If you're going to support youth, or if you're going to support children's rights, okay, maybe then you can mention we will use children sensitive language, as well as in our publications, as well as adult language when we are addressing children in particular, or similar, or something similar to that. I think there was another question. Regarding municipalities, now I'm answering this question about a recycling project. You will see, if you want, you can clarify this with the contracting authority. My personal interpretation is that municipalities are not eligible to be lead applicants or co-applicants in this call for proposal, because there's no mention of them at all in the list of eligible applicants, in the criteria for eligible applicants, sorry. But then you may refer to them as simply to stakeholders. If some of your activities require some permission from these municipalities, strong cooperation with them, and so on and so forth, you may decide to plan to have a certain project board or another mechanism where these municipalities could be involved. But I wouldn't recommend, without clarifying this further by reading the guidelines, to mention them as lead applicants or co-applicants under your project. But regardless of that, for sure, mention them as your stakeholders when presenting your concept notes. Okay, to move on then, the next section of the concept note, relevance of the action. Relevance of the action is to be placed on 3 pages. So 2 pages for design, 3 pages for the relevance. And then there is a list of kind of like subtitles that you can also read from just going through this template. Relevance to the objectives, relevance to the particular needs and constraints of the target countries, regions, and then target groups and final beneficiaries, and then particular added value elements. So these are, let's say, subsections of the relevance section. When answering this first, let's call it subsection, try to, as I said in the very beginning, try to read guidelines. Please see what the objective of the call for proposal is, overall objective, and then specific objective. I've seen in numerous concept notes the situation where people say, our project is relevant fully, we're fully relevant with the objectives of the call, and then similarly to the previous illustration I gave you where the claim is made, our project will be environmentally friendly fully. It's not enough to say we are fully relevant. I mean, you have to explain how your project is relevant to objectives of the call because of this and that. I mean, because it plans to do these and these things, because it plans to have an impact on these and these issues, and so on and so forth. Remember that there are certain priorities here listed as well. So when explaining how your project relates to objectives of the call, don't only mention objectives of the call, but also specific priorities of the call. If you remember yesterday, and I will open the guidelines once again, just to be clear that we know what we're talking about. In this section 1.2, objectives of the program and priority issues, specific objectives of the call are defined, and then the priorities of the call are defined. So this is what you're referring to in your concept notes when you're explaining how your project is relevant. Then also, if you are perhaps, you've seen also in the guidelines that there is this important note they're mentioning on page 6. They're saying whatever is done should be complementary to other actions currently implemented with EU. So if there is any complementarity that you've observed with other particular projects or interventions, you can mention that in the relevant section in this particular subsection actually. Yeah, maybe you have some questions. There was a question where you can get the guidelines for applicants. Guidelines for applicants can be obtained at this particular website, Europaid. We talked about that yesterday. So, you can use Facebook and GST website, but this is the official link. And that will be the first document that opens up when you go to this particular link. So yeah, this is where you can get the guidelines for applicants. Hugely important document. You have to really study this carefully before submitting, because most mistakes, most errors are done because people don't carefully read the guidelines. And then to move on with the relevant section, this is what you're asked to present when we're talking about the second subsection of the relevance part of your concept notes. Pre-project situation in the target country, detailed analysis of the problems to be addressed, any significant plans that perhaps are undertaken at national, regional, and local level, and how the action relates to such plans. Hugely important, if you are continuing previous actions, mention this, indicate this. Of course, you say this project is a continuation of such and such action, but then also please explain how this intervention builds on this previous action. If your action is perhaps a part of a larger program, you can also make references to this. If there are any synergies that you've observed or you're planning to enforce or reinforce in the implementation of the action, that can be mentioned, and complementarity with other initiatives by other donors as well. And then, I mean, I mentioned this already in previous sessions. I will not repeat, but if you have some claims, try to support them with some studies, papers, documents, research, surveys done previously, and where possible, if there is any kind of synergy likelihood, you've identified perhaps other projects dealing with the same issue or something similar, you can always, of course, also plan not only to mention this synergy as a theoretical potential, but also to plan some kind of stakeholder involvement or something similar within your actions. Target groups and then final beneficiaries, their needs and constraints, and how the action will address these needs. Hugely important part of the concept note as well, the so-called so what element of your proposal. You explain that your proposal is relevant to the objectives of the goal, and then also that it fits within the local plans that perhaps exist, and then also local initiatives. That's all great, but you need to demonstrate how it actually helps your target groups and your final beneficiaries. If you are planning to do certain trainings, mentorships, sub-granting, definitely always try to think of selection criteria as well. Try to explain how you will gain access to these people, to these groups during the implementation of your actions. And then also important to mention, any participatory process that took place before the submission. As I said, it's always a good idea to actually consult stakeholders, and then in particular, it's a good idea to consult stakeholders. I mean, your target group as your stakeholder, and that can be mentioned in the concept notes, but what can be planned as well is some kind of participatory process where your target group is taking part in your project. I've seen that there were a couple of more questions, but I will leave. I will finalize this part of the presentation and then go through the remaining questions. And then to go back to the template, the last section, the last subsection, I'm sorry, of the relevance is particular added value elements. Remember that there are added value elements already defined in the guidelines for applicants, and so of course, I mean, make sure to study them and to mention them in your proposals. Again, don't just go ahead and say, like, we will be child-friendly, environmentally friendly, tolerant, and so on, but try to illustrate how these added value elements will actually be mainstream in your proposals, operationalized, how this is going to be addressed. Checklist, I mentioned this in the very beginning, it's given only for self-guidance purposes. You're deleting it before submission. It's just there for you, like if any of the answers are no, then you should like be no, made a mistake, I should do this, but at the end of the day, this is only for self-guidance purposes. And then also, like, instructions were followed, follow them fully. I'm sorry. And I mean, it's a good idea to study this checklist also to understand what you need to do in terms of this declaration But other than that, I mean, it's a straightforward document that's just there for your simple guidance. And then there is a part in the concept note where you're presenting your administrative information, details on yourself as a lead applicant, details on the affiliated entities or co-applicants if they exist. Associates can be planned. There is no space, I mean formal space in this concept note where you can mention the associates in terms of tables, in terms of administrative data. But I mean, if you're planning any associates under the project, we mentioned yesterday, guidelines have a specific section on them, so please study that also to understand what associates on the project could be. But if you're planning to include any of them, that can be explained in the design of the action. Yeah, and I mentioned this last part, that lead applicants sign on behalf of all applicants, all co-applicants, so make sure that your co-applicants will indeed be ready to take part in the full application, stage. A couple of issues that are important to be mentioned perhaps before we close this particular session. You can only exceptionally, I mentioned this already, but I would like to highlight again, replace a co-applicant or an affiliated entity in between the stages from the concept note to full application stage. So try to avoid this, and also adjusting the duration of the action is a little bit of an issue as well. So try to avoid adjusting the duration of the action in between the phases as well. If you're planning, try to plan for optimum duration of the action in the very beginning at the concept note stage. Things will take time, definitely. Reporting will take time, procurement will take time. So, 6-month projects are really meant to be simple projects with only one activity and so on and so forth. Try to avoid having projects which envisage just insufficient time to complete all the activities that are planned. There are some tips for preparing good concept notes. They are presented here in this particular slide, and then furthermore as well. I think that I mentioned more or less all these issues, but you will receive, as yesterday, you will receive this presentation, so you can also follow through. Yeah, some examples are presented here as well. We already mentioned this. Try not to have more than 3 specific objectives. Example for how to present a target group is also given, like try to mention numbers, and then also for final beneficiaries, there is an example here that you can also use. Don't overpromise. I would like to emphasize this fact as well as hugely important. You may as well receive a grant, and then you'll be in trouble if you overpromised and if you mention that you will do all possible activities of this world, and then at a later stage all of a sudden you realize that you don't have a budget for them and that you don't have time, to complete all these activities. There are some cross-cutting activities that are sometimes forgotten, when these concept notes are developed, and project management, communication, stakeholder involvement. I did mention this yesterday, but I would just like to highlight again that, I mean, you will need these activities regardless of what subject of your project is, so plan for them. Yeah, on this particular slide, you can see some of the lessons learned, so to speak. from previous assessment processes. And that's perhaps important also for you to go through poorly developed, not convincing concept notes. There were lots of these previously, and I think that's like a key word, convincing. You know, you're preparing something. There is a certain competition. We expect, you know, a competition on this call for proposal as well. And then you simply need to try to be convincing in your document to convince people that this is a project that's worthwhile pursuing further and funding. Random selection of target groups, sometimes even a confusion between these target groups and final beneficiaries, weak institutional needs assessment. There were some of the problems that were identified previously during the assessment processes, so I'm just presenting this to you now so that you avoid these traps. That's the reason why I mentioned. And the need to have structured objectives. When they say structured, they mean this intervention logic that's clear and that's logical and that's coherent. Yeah, I saw that there were a couple of questions. So if you don't mind, I will propose to make a really short, maybe like a 4-minute break. I would like to go through the questions that were asked during the presentation just to see perhaps if I missed something, and then we can return back in 5 minutes. In the meantime, if you have any additional questions that relate to this session, also please use this chat to ask these questions. So then let's talk back in 5 minutes. The template for the concept note, and then let's go back to the guidelines. You will see that sectors or themes are defined in this little sentence here. So there are no separate themes here under this call for proposal. We have an objective, overall objective of the call for proposal, and then we have a set of specific objectives, and then there are priorities and added values, but no particular themes as such, topics as such are defined. So you don't really have to worry about these themes. There is a question about focus groups that are planned with certain communities. Is it necessary to outline details of this action? I mean, yeah, given all the things that which I mentioned already a couple of times, try to fit in these 5 pages, you know, so try to explain using 1 or 2 sentences, not more than that, as to what these focus groups will be about, how many people will take part, will there be a note taker, you know, will there be a questionnaire developed in advance. Try to present the methodology for the focus groups, but in briefly, you know, you don't really have to go into details as to perhaps explain number of expected participants and their structure, but you don't have to go into details as to what will be the locality where each of these focus groups will be held, or time, you know, etc. You can mention that this is going to be maybe half-day event or something like that. Sustainable development goals, yes, you can mention this.
Alexander?
Yep.
We are not managing to see the presentation.
Yeah, I close the presentation now because I'm going through the questions. It's somehow it's easier for me. But I will share the screen in a minute. I think that I have one or two more questions too. And then there is a question about sustainable development goals. As I said, yeah, I mean, for sure you can explain in added value elements of your project. Not only importance of sustainable development goals, but how your project tackles them, how your project proposal addresses them. Then there was another question about the outcome of our project will be directly linked to the non-profit organizations in the building sector in Northern Cyprus. Can I mention them in the section of target groups? Yeah, of course. It would be good to understand who these non-profit organizations are, what's their number, what's the need, what are the constraints. For sure, you should mention them when presenting target groups. In order to identify thorough target group selection in general, could you give us some tips? Well, I mean, proper stakeholder analysis should answer all these questions, you know, but in terms of the target groups, think about those groups, individuals, groups, structures that will benefit from your project. I guess that this is the easiest advice. You know, sometimes people forget maybe the core activity is, let's say, launching of a certain, like a community-based service for, let's say, children. And then those children would for sure be your target group. I mean, maybe you want to launch like a daycare center, and maybe you want to serve 20 people in this, children, sorry, in this daycare center, and those 20 children would definitely be your target group. But then think a little bit further about, okay, there maybe there will also be their parents. There will be some activities with them. So that's also your target group. So it's not only children all of a sudden, but then also it's parents. And then perhaps there will be some activities that include other children in the area or in the regions, and then they also expected to benefit from your project. So those groups of children would also then be target group. So once you are done with activity presentation, when you know what your project is about, think about all those groups and all those individuals and structures that are directly going to benefit from your project. As someone mentioned, there may be some municipalities, and then residents of these municipalities, well, that's your target group as well. But then maybe you will be working with media, or maybe you will be working with civil society organizations from these regions, from these municipalities. Maybe there are a couple of activities planned there. Maybe you want to involve them in your stakeholder involvement mechanisms or in your other activities. So then also those will be your target groups as well. Usually on the projects you have a primary target group, a certain number of people that will receive some primary benefits from your action, and then there are some, let's call them secondary target groups that are also there. They do benefit, but sometimes we take this for granted and we don't mention them. No, there is a question also about the expertise of the people who will be involved. First of all, you don't submit any CVs. Let me try to mention this because some people have experience with different calls for proposals where they actually do need to submit CVs for the people that will be running the project. So no, that's not done. You don't need to name, you don't need to provide names of people who are going to be managing the project or the people who are going to be providing technical expertise to the project. But there is a possibility that in your design of the action, it's highly important sometimes that you mention, that you do have an access to a certain expertise. Like a colleague recently mentioned that they would like to do a research, and obviously this is going to be a research that's going to be of some complexity because it's going to include some focus groups in different localities. So you can mention that you have an access to required expertise. In this particular case, those would be the research well, assistants to start with. Someone's going to have to do these focus groups, but then also methodologists, and then also perhaps sociologists, and so on and so forth. So you can mention. It gives an idea that your design of the action is coherent, but you don't have to stress the professional capacities, and you don't have to go into details when it comes to professional capacities of people or experts who are going to be involved in the project. And I think that there were no other questions from this particular session. Anyone maybe has anything to add? If something was left unclear, maybe if you're working on your concept notes, maybe you've seen that, you know, something's troubling you, maybe you don't understand a certain term, which now it's time to ask. I mean, if something came up as an issue. If not, I will continue presenting. I hope that you can see the presentation now. I've switched to. Okay. Assessment process. Let's go back to guidelines just for a minute also to see. I mean, there was a question yesterday, yeah, in regards to this assessment process, but then also to mention it today as well. Section 2.3 of the guidelines, evaluation and selection of applications. Study this as well when you're preparing your concept notes. You're not going to be assessing your projects, of course. I mean, someone else is going to do it, but it's not a bad idea. I know sometimes there's no time for that, but if you do have enough and sufficient time for that, you could perhaps try to share your concept notes with a certain an individual maybe, or someone who you regard as an expert, or at least a colleague, just for someone else who hasn't been involved in the preparation to go through and read, and just to, you know, like tell you, okay, I don't really understand this particular section that you presented. I think that you could strengthen this and that. Sometimes it's useful that whenever you're writing something, I mean, people who are involved in writing and who are authors, they know this very well. You need a break from the document that you developed. At a certain moment, you become subjective. You are no longer objective as to this product, and it's not a bad idea to share the document, to share the draft concept note with a colleague who understands the topics, and for them to perhaps just give you comments and say if something's not clear to them, if they think that something could be strengthened. But it's not also a bad idea to go through these questions that are presented in this page 28 of this guidelines, where you will see that there are numbers of questions, and this is the way your concept notes, I mean, this is how your concept notes will be evaluated. These questions are to be answered by the independent assessors who will be recruited to study your concept notes. And then, as I said, it's not a bad idea to go through them, to give your concept note to perhaps even, you know, a group of 2 people, and to ask them, could you please score this, you know, as if you were an assessor. But what would be your opinion on my concept note? How would I score? It's given there for a reason. The reason is one of the reasons is transparency, because the European Commission wants you to understand how these proposals and how these concept notes will be assessed. And as we already have these available, in my opinion, you should use them. Based on my experience, organizations and people sending concept note proposals and full application forms as well, sometimes they don't really read this, you know, scoring. I'm not saying that the ultimate goal is to pass the scoring. You're supposed to propose something that fits your needs and that is a response to the needs that you've observed. But if you made an effort, I think it's common sense then also to try your best and then to have, to have your concept note awarded at the end, passing through to the next stage. So study these questions, go through them, and try to have someone helping you, maybe even, doing a test scoring by yourself to see if there's something that you could increase in terms of quality before submitting. Um, we can maybe go to, I can explain you a little bit how the process goes. Usually not usually, but I mean in general terms, in principle, concept notes are scored by two independent assessors. Usually it's two per project. And then the average scores are summed up. And then CN's concept notes are ranked according to these average scores. These proceedings are fully confidential. And assessors, they're supposed to be independent individuals with integrity, but then also they're formally bound to confidentiality, so they cannot reveal any details of the assessment process to the parties involved, including you. So I'm saying this even though I'm sure that this is not the case in this group that we are in today, but obtaining any kind of information from assessors who are involved in assessment of your concept note, that's a no. Like don't even, perhaps if you're familiar with these people, don't go and chase them and ask them, but what's the score for my concept note, can I learn, and so on. That's forbidden, that's not allowed. The lead applicants will be receiving the information. That's also important to know. So like even though some projects could be implemented in partnership, primary contact that we'll discuss this a little bit later on when we discuss Pador and Prospect, but you are usually providing a contact name in this database and an email, and that particular person will receive the information about provisional selection, scores obtained, and so on. And of course, then it's a matter of good practice to share this with partners. But I mean, it will be only the lead applicants who will be receiving the information of the assessment process. And then there is a threshold on this call for proposal, at least 30 points out of maximum 50. So and that's a minimum that's required for any concept note to pass into the next selection, into the next phase. It doesn't, of course, mean that automatically, if the average score that you've obtained is 30 points, that you will be invited. It depends on the number of concept notes received, the budgets requested, and so on and so forth. The threshold doesn't necessarily need to be 30 points. It's mathematically determined once the ranking list is defined. Important issue you've observed while we were talking about templates for concept notes. You've observed that there are two sections. We discussed a little bit about the relevance section, and then we discussed a little bit about design of the action section. 2 pages for the description of the action, and then 3 pages for the relevance of the action, as I mentioned. Why 3 pages? Why all these sub sections? Because the score that you obtained for the relevance in the concept note assessment is transferred further into the full application form assessment. So you're kind of like bound with this score. If you, for example, receive 20 points under the relevance quality criteria at the concept note evaluation stage, those 25 points will be transferred to your full application form assessment. We can go back to guidelines so that you could understand this perhaps a little bit more, you can see the maximum number of points that you can score for the relevance of the action is 25. And let's say there is an organization that has scored 25, and that organization or that individual, they're invited to submit a full application form, and then you see that this 25 points, that's already kind of like given to them. There is a certain number, like a little footnote here, and it explains to you that this number of points is actually transferred in the full application stage. So you may be invited to submit a full application form, but then you may observe that your design of the action was, really good, but then your relevance of the action not so good. And then that's an indication for you that you really have to do a good full application form, and that you have to score highest as possible in all the other qualitative areas in order to be funded at the end of the day. Yeah, so that's something to mention also. Why this relevance is so important, so hugely important, because it's kind of like scored twice. The score that you obtain under the concept note evaluation form, it's used again in the full application form assessment as well. Yeah, I think that I went through what's written on this slide, and here are the questions that are presented in the guidelines as well. We briefly went through them, but let's go through them in a little bit of more detail. You will see when it comes to relevance of the action, there are 4 questions that are asked, and it's more or less the same as information in the guidelines. It's just presented in this kind of a format. How relevant is your proposal to the objectives and priorities of the call for proposals? The number of points that you can obtain under this question is actually not 5 but 10. You see here 5 times 2, because this is important issue. It's regarded as important quality criteria. So therefore, when going back into your concept note templates, look into this issue 131. This is why it's highly important to say, to explain why your proposal is relevant for these particular objectives of the call and for these particular priorities of the call, and why it's a huge disappointment if you only write our proposal is fully relevant to the objectives of this call and end there, and not try to illustrate what it actually brings about, how it tackles these objectives, how it addresses them. So maximum 10 points here. Then, how relevant is the proposal to the particular needs and constraints of the target countries, regions, and relevant sectors? You remember again from the template, this is what's presented in section 131. This is the second subsection of the relevance section in the relevance section in the concept notes. 5 points maximum, therefore hugely important as well, to explain, are there any synergies, what are the actual needs, what are the constraints, could it be how your project addresses them, etc., etc. How clearly defined and strategically chosen are those involved? Have their needs and constraints been clearly defined? Does the proposal address them appropriately? That's the third kind of like set of questions that's asked. That's a part of the evaluation grid. Again, maximum 5 points. And again, going back to the template, this is the presentation from the section 133. Of course, I mean, assessment is done in a way, if I can say, organically. I mean, you read the concept note throughout, and then you see if it could be a possibility that you mentioned your target groups in 132 or in 131, but I mean, primarily you would look for information in this particular session. I'm presenting this now, switching between the questions and the template for you to understand how this relates. and how this is all interconnected. And then added value elements, this is 1.4. As I said, please bear in mind, let's go back to the guidelines, that this particular call for proposal is actually quite clear as to what added values are expected. It lists them, and therefore it's like a good idea to read this and to understand this and to follow this through. Let me just check if there were any questions. It's a common concern. I read the question, like what happens if the assessors do not have the expertise in your field. It's a common concern. Based on my experience, assessors are selected so that we have combination of skills and expertise. So there could be someone with a certain expertise in a particular field, and then another person with a certain expertise in another field, and so on and so forth. But just bear in mind that it's an advice. I don't know what is going to be the situation in this particular call. I'm just speaking on the basis of experience. Bear in mind that there could be some issues. There could be some like expertise that's actually lacking in these assessors. But then you need to make like a convincing presentation as to why is this important. Perhaps myself, I can't understand how like thermal imaging of buildings goes about, but I understand the effects of the analysis of thermal imaging of buildings because it's going to affect how electricity is used, and then also there are implications for environmental protection. It has never been done, so this is why we are going to do it. It's important to present this so what element, in your projects. I'm not saying make it simplistic as possible, but if something is a scientific term or a highly professional term that requires a little bit of expertise and that's not commonly known, I'll use a footnote or something to explain what this process is about, to explain further to the people. But as I said, I mean, it's a common concern, but not really embedded in reality, because usually what happens is that you have a group of people doing the assessment where skills are different and expertise and backgrounds are different, and then project proposals are allocated to them based on their experience. Is it decided how many CN will be accepted at the first stage? What is the expected percentage of success? Really difficult to say, because percentage can be determined only when you know how many concept notes had been received. But what I want to briefly explain is this. Let's say there is a certain number of concept notes that were received. Let's say maybe even we receive, like, I will now just give like a wild guess, 200 concept notes, but then they are all poor. I mean, that's one scenario. It's not going to happen. I'm just illustrating for you to understand what all this wording in these guidelines mean. And then none of them is scored like above 30. Well, it means that there will be no funds distributed, because they are all poor. So one issue to take into account is this number 30 score that has to be passed in order for the concept notes to be further, like addressed, evaluated. And then it also depends on the budgets that were requested. You see here in this particular paragraph, it says at least 250 of the available budget. let's go back to the beginning of the guidelines to understand what is the available budget of this particular call for proposal. Somewhere in the very beginning, it says 2 million. So what happens is that a ranking is made. 30 is a threshold regardless of this ranking. And then budgets are calculated, and then up to 250 of 2 million, that would be like 4 million something. All these budgets are calculated, and then this is how all these concept notes that fit into this 250 of the available budgets are invited to submit their full applications. So therefore, it's really difficult to say what is the percentage success, because it depends on several factors. It depends on the number of proposals received. It depends on the budgets that are requested within these proposals. And then it also depends on the number of, points obtained after the assessment. So this is how the assessment process goes. It's highly mathematical, actually, more than anything else. And it also depends a little bit on the budgets that are requested. If all organizations request maximum budgets for lot 1 and for lot 2, there will be less projects that will be invited to submit their full application forms, because a ranking list is established, but then also a cumulative budget list is established. So to answer a question a little bit more as to how this how this is done. So it's not possible to say how many CNs will be accepted at the first stage, but we can make a really wild guess, saying, for example, if everyone requests 60,000, if everyone is happy with the quality of projects in lot 1, we have around 400,000 euros available here. At the concept note stage, we can expect that there will be around 1 million budget. So you can calculate based on this information, but that's really just like a wild guess. Is if our project will be rejected. Okay, let's not be negative, and let's hope that your project will not be rejected. Can we apply to appeal the assessor's decision, or have you got any set of rules outlined under these circumstances? Let's go back to our famous document called the Guidelines for Applicants. You will see that all your answers are there. It's like there is an appeal process. The template has changed a little bit, so there is an explanation as to what the appeal process looks like. I will try to look for it. As I said, the template has changed a little bit, so I'm not really able to find it immediately, but it's explained in the guidelines. You can complain, of course, and there is a process prescribed there. You can request that another, like assessment is done, but that is not really done frequently, to be honest with you as well. And it's really questionable whether this is going to lead to a change of the decision. It's quite normal that people have different opinions. It's also sometimes very personal. I was sometimes also involved in preparation of some concept notes previously while working on some other jobs, and then I received really, sometimes amazing scores, sometimes really negative scores. What you receive as an answer following the complaint letter is a little bit more information as to how the scoring has been done, what were the issues that were detected, and so on and so forth. And then it gives you a little bit more information then for the future. That's a useful document. That's a useful thing to receive as well. But I mean, the appeal process exists. It has to exist. It's normal, and and if you are dissatisfied with the decision, you can complain. During the break, I will go through the guidelines, and then I will find this section which explains how the appeal process is done. Are there any set of rules? I'm not really sure what you're talking about when it comes to assessment, but assessors are assessing these projects, but they are only presenting their assessment to the evaluation committee, which is established by the contracting authority, and then the evaluation committee members are actually making the decision as to decision on the funding. Can I present more than one CN? Please, please go back to the guidelines as well. You will see there that there is a rule regarding the number of applications that you can submit. You can submit one concept note for lot 1, and you can submit one concept note. One and the same applicant, you can submit one concept note to lot 1 and then one concept note to lot 2, but you will be awarded only one grant. So have this in mind as well. Have this in mind as well, that in the event that you submitted the 2 best in the world concept notes, still you'll be, and if all of them are, if both of them are assessed well, at the end, you will be asked to make a decision as to what grant you would like to actually be receiving, because it's not possible to receive 2 grant contracts as a result of this call, but only one. So that's also important to note. Page 17, guidelines for applicants. You can see these rules here. The lead applicant may not submit more than one application per lot under this call for proposals. The lead applicant may not be awarded more than one grant under this call for proposal. The lead applicant may be a co-applicant or an affiliated entity in another application. A co-applicant may be the co-applicant or an affiliated entity in more than one application under this call. So these are the rules that relate to this number of concept notes to be submitted. Can I apply 2 lot 1s or 2 lot 2s, or does it have to be 1 lot 1 and 1 lot 2? Yeah, exactly. 1 application per lot. So it has to be 1 lot 2 and 1 lot 1 at maximum. If the assessor's feedback will be disseminated to the applicants, what you usually receive, it is quite possible that some rules have changed. I will double check this during the break, but what you usually receive are the scores. But you can, sometimes the scores are accompanied by the wording, by the narrative wording explaining how the scores were awarded. But in the event of a high number of applications, you receive only scores. But then again, you can always ask for clarification, and you can always ask for the information as to why these scores were awarded as such. And then a summary assessment is shared with you, where elaboration and thinking of the assessors and what led them in their scoring is presented to you. So to answer that particular question, let me go back to the presentation then. Design of the action. There are a couple of issues here. How coherent is the overall design of the action? Does this design reflect a robust analysis of the problems involved? Are the activities feasible? To which extent does the proposal integrate relevant cross-cutting elements? So these are the 5 questions. Sorry, there is a mistake here apparently. 4 questions. I don't know what happened. These are the 4 questions that are discussed when the design of the action is in question. And then let's go back to the guidelines once again. Maximum number of points that you can obtain, 25. And you will see also that how coherent is the overall design of the action. I did mention this word a couple of times today and yesterday. The reason why I did it is this. I mean, again, this is something that may lead you to the maximum of 10 points. It's regarded as important quality criteria for the concept notes. Some important concepts: relevant, credible, coherence, resilience, robustness, they are explained here. Some of these words are mentioned in the assessment grids and questions, so I thought maybe it would be also important for you to understand them and to look into them and so on and so forth. Let's go back to this coherence, internal coherence of the action and external coherence of the action. I think that both of these concepts are important to understand, that internal logic of your action is in order, and that it also fits with whatever is happening on the outside in terms of other interventions, other projects, other programs, and so on and so forth. In these last couple of slides, you will see, I think that someone wanted to ask a question. Yeah?
You cannot see the presentation notes.
Okay, let me see what happened.
We haven't seen the last couple. That's what I thank you.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I will try to. I hope that you saw the last slides. If not, again, this is the assessment grid for the relevance of the action, assessment grid for the design of the action. Another slide explaining some important concepts, and then this particular slide, it's a little bit of a translation of the previous, 3 slides, maybe in different wording, giving you a kind of like a insight as to what are these assessors looking for when they are assessing relevance. A kind of a checklist that you can also use when developing your concept notes. Look into, oh, have I actually explained all these things? Is the information provided on local conditions? Is data presented convincing? Are there any linkages or duplications with other interventions, and so on and so forth? And the next slide is also about when assessing design. When assessing design, what are the assessors usually looking into? I guess what's important there when design is in question, external factors, stakeholders, presentation of the experience of the organizations, what these now individuals, organizations that are now involved in the project, what have they done in the past that's relevant for this particular project. Are there any missing activities? Internal logic of the proposed intervention. Are the results clear, measurable, realistic? Again, as I said, it's just kind of like a checklist for you to understand what these people are looking into when they're assessing your project, and also to perhaps look into, have I actually explained all these things in my concept note? Okay, so are there any additional questions when it comes to the previous session? Okay, as I said, I mean, if there are any other additional questions, please now is the time to ask them. Yesterday I shared with you an example of a concept note. I don't know if people had time to read it through. Are there any comments in terms of this concept note that was shared? How does it look to you? If you were the assessor, how would you assess it? Any feedback? Have you? I was trying to share with you. Yeah, I closed the presentation now because I was trying to share with you the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation as such. I don't know if you can maybe download it, if you can see it now. It should be in your chat.
Hello.
Yes.
The PowerPoint presentation is in chat. I'm just downloading it, or I'm downloading it now. But as far as the concept note that we were looking at, or that you supplied, I find it very interesting to look at a completely different field of interest from my own field of interest and see how well formed the argument is. I think it follows the guidelines quite well. As an assessor, I would pass it. Definitely give it 35 out of 50.
This is Michael here, team leader of the GST. Hello, Martin.
Hi, Michael.
Martin, the objective, right, of the case study, in fact, was to present a really bad concept note riddled with mistakes.
Is that right?
Yes. So
good,
in fact,
good thing I'm attending this training course then.
So I'm sure, Alexandra, now we can put the concept note up on a shared screen and go through it and maybe see where the deficiencies are. So in fact, it's not there as a good example.
Oh, bloody hell.
It's specifically there, in fact, as a bad example.
Well, I got fooled, Michael. As I said, it's an area distant from my own concern, and it seemed quite plausible to me.
Right. Okay.
Had it been environmental orientated, perhaps then I would have found the holes more easily.
Right. So we thought it would be a better idea to provide an example with various deficiencies of, and then to show what not to do.
All right.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll see an example of what we should do.
No, yesterday we presented a couple of log frames, and as I said, please don't, based on my experience, people are sometimes thinking, oh, this is what I should do. But then this is the reason why I asked you. You think that it's well elaborated. You think that it's a good argument. I will open the document and explain it. But it was sent to all of you, and it was also shared with all of you yesterday. So I don't know if anyone else has actually read it. If anyone else has any comment as to what was shared with you yesterday.
Yesterday I actually had a quick look. This is Aisha again, and I read it quickly, and I thought it was a good proposal as well. So I'm really curious.
Okay, this is rather interesting. Okay, I will try to open the document. I don't know. Let me
Thank you, Aisha.
Presentation. Can you Can you see the document now? It should be on your screen now.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Let's maybe talk about some technical issues. You will see that the text as such is not really well organized. It's just, you know, technically, it's just a list of sentences. Nothing is bolded, nothing is emphasized. Really difficult to follow from the reader's perspective, just, you know, to start with a simple thing. We were mentioning yesterday and also today that it's also important, you know, to make a point, to make a case, maybe use an illustration or two to make your case, you know, to strengthen your proposal. So this particular concept, no, it's missing completely, that element. Then also something really simple, but was emphasized a couple of times as well. Smart objectives, you know, specific, measurable. Let's look into the objectives of this particular concept now. Improvement of position of persons with disabilities as an overall objective, and then improvement of accessibility to healthcare institution as a specific objective. Yeah, I mean, it gives you an indication as to what these people want to do, of course. But is this really measurable? What does it mean, accessibility of healthcare institution? Is it going to become fully accessible? Is it going to become partially accessible? These are the issues that immediately come to your mind. It doesn't really say where. Of course, it's a blind concept node, so you don't really have an opportunity to understand, I mean, as readers, where is all this taking place. But it doesn't really say when, it doesn't really say where. So objectives, no, not really smart. If you remember, there were a couple of slides that explained that these objectives should be specific, measurable, achievable, time-bound, and so on and so forth. I mentioned also a couple of times today and also yesterday, target groups. Try to quantify them as possible, you know, as much as possible. You can see here target groups, members of the Association of Paraplegics and the Association of Multiple Sclerosis. It doesn't really say, is this 5, is this 10, is this 200, is this 8? What is this number that we're talking about? Also, wording really brief. And target group only one. It's members of the association. Final beneficiaries, okay, people with disabilities, the elderly, mothers of children, and then 3 full stops. It's like everyone is a final beneficiary of this particular project. And then we have 2 estimated results, nothing is numbered. And then only a couple of main activities, installation of elevator, and then supply of a special vehicle. Of course, this is a concept node that hasn't been submitted to this particular call because the call is still ongoing. But if it has been submitted to this particular call, let's remember the fact that there are certain ceilings when it comes to purchase of equipment, installation work, infrastructural work. So we have a proposal here that's completely outside of the call for proposal that's in question because it's mainly dealing with equipment purchase. As you can see, an infrastructural works, no other activities, and you remember that I mentioned, yeah, you do not need to submit a budget now, but there are ceilings, and if there is a project that deals only with purchase of equipment or infrastructural work, well, that's not a call for proposal for that kind of project. Okay, I will just stop now to see. I can see that there are a couple of questions asked, but for some reason it doesn't switch to chat immediately. Let's go back to description of the action also. Okay, we understand how this building looks alike. We understand how these floors are organized. But nothing apart from that. You can see here in this particular description of the action, it's mixing a little bit of relevance with the design of the action because they're giving us information on the key stakeholders. They're actually explaining why this project is relevant, much more than explaining how it will be done. Remember also stakeholder involvement. We mentioned that yesterday during the presentations. Nothing of that sort is planned here, really. We don't have a you know, like a project board or some kind of community involvement. In fact, it's only the members of these organizations that are supposed to benefit from this particular project. Maybe other people with disabilities in this particular region are also in need, but that's not really explained. Then the intervention is to be done on the healthcare center, as far as we understand, right? Let's go back to the beginning. We are not clear whether there is any co-applicant there, whether this healthcare center is actually a partner under the project, how the access to this healthcare center is going to be ensured. That's also an issue that's not explained. And then, if you remember, okay, this is a little bit of a different template, and it asks you to present your description of the action even on a less number of pages, maximum 1. But intervention logic, how are these outputs and income and impact interrelated? Nothing of that kind. Nothing of that kind is actually presented. Nothing of that kind is actually presented here. So lots of issues, lots of problems. I don't know if you agree with me. And then relevance of the action as well. Let's look into this. Generic information on what a term means. It's useful, of course, to know, but then again, how is this really relevant for this particular action? Because you can see from the title of the organization that they are only dealing with one type of disability. They are not a cross-disability organization. So they're not looking into needs of people with disabilities on a wider scale other than accessible environment. There are 10 organizations in this particular region. This is mentioned in the project. There are 10 organizations in this particular region where that are the associations of people with disabilities. But then how are these organizations going to be involved in the project, and how is this information relevant? That's also not really mentioned. Some past experience is mentioned, which is positive. That's a positive thing. But how now this feeds onto this? Is there any plan for ensuring full accessibility of this particular healthcare center? We don't know. We don't know how is this going to you know, like address the problem fully. Will there be a need to have more funds allocated for this particular healthcare center in the future to solve the problem, and so on and so forth. Most importantly, no one is mentioning anywhere in this particular presentation what are the objectives of the call or proposal that they're sending an application for, and how does this particular project proposal actually address them. And that's what's requested, you know, in the very title of the concept note: relevance to the objectives and priorities of the call for proposal. And we don't see any wording of that kind in this presentation at all. They're just simply explaining what the project is about, but they're not saying we're relevant for this particular call for proposal because of that or the other reason. When it comes to relevance of particular needs and constraints of the target country, in other initiatives, duplications, it's really weak, to be honest with you. Nothing about other initiatives that are taking place at the local level. We've read somewhere that there are, other organizations that are active, that there is a mention here that there are certain local plans and strategies that are dealing with the subject area, but then nothing here as to how this project is integrated into these local plans, and so on and so forth. And then needs and constraints. We only have data on the total number of the population that's supposed to be served through this particular intervention, a list of associations that are active, but then nothing really explaining how these organizations are going to be involved and engaged in the project. Nothing whatsoever of that kind, and rather an abstract, very general, particular added elements that are not really telling us much as to, what added value elements here will be operationalized in the project. So this concept note, according to my personal opinion, is, you can understand from the concept note that they have a goal worthwhile pursuing, and of course, as per se, accessibility for people with disabilities is an important issue, but other than that, nothing else. No integration into local plans, no elaboration on the relevance, which is, let's go back to the assessment grid, hugely important. Now you obtain a certain score, it will be transferred to the full application form score, so hugely important, and nothing whatsoever mentioned. When it comes to synergy, external coherence of the action, also, we do not really read here that this project has any intentions to cooperate with anything other that it may exist in this particular locality, or in this particular region, or in this particular territory. So the reason why we wanted to share this with you is that I believe that you can also learn from, let's call them like bad examples. Please don't use generalized statements, and please explain specifics of your projects. Okay, there is a local plan, there is a strategy, there are sustainable development goals, as a colleague mentioned previously in one of the questions, but okay, how does this project actually relate to all this? That is the essence that should be captured in the concept notes. I think that someone wanted to add something, like.
Just wanted to say thank you, very useful. But is it possible to see like a very good proposal as an example?
Sorry, I'm going through the questions. I'm going through the questions. No. Yeah, sure, it's possible to have a break. We are a little bit behind the schedule, 20 minutes. I saw in the comments that people would like to break, and I totally agree with this. So yeah, I would propose that then we break for, let's say, maybe 20 minutes. Would that be okay with people? And then to continue with the workshop. In the meantime, I will upload this sample concept note. I don't know what happened. It was shared with you yesterday, but I don't know if maybe you didn't receive it or not, so that you have a copy of it, a Word copy of it as well.
So are we taking a break? Hello?
Yeah, I think that I saw a couple of comments, and according to the agenda, we are a little bit behind the schedule as well. There was supposed to be a break now, so yeah, in 20 minutes, I think we can come back in your time. I'm 1 hour before, so perhaps we can go back to the workshop. Is everyone there? Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, good. So let's go back then to this infamous concept note example. I would like to hear perhaps some impressions and comments by people when it comes to how convincing this concept note is for them. In my opinion, no, this wouldn't really fly. As you can see, no quantification in the first initial presentation. Even if you analyze this a little bit more, you will see that they're mentioning some intentions later on in the text that are not really explained in the design of the action, like we will know more on the needs of the people with disabilities. But how? Because there's only 2 activities. It's like an elevator will be installed and a vehicle will be purchased. You know, the list of activities really minimum as well. So that's also another issue. Sometimes in the concept notes you have explanation on some intentions that are in place. People are saying we will do this and we will do that, and then you look into the list of activities and you actually see, oh well, there are no activities that relate to this intentions, improving the knowledge and skills of health workers and their organization will create better conditions. How? I mean, simply there's no activity that responds to the intentions that are explained here. Anyone perhaps has any comments in relation to this?
Alexandra,
Yes.
this is Michael here again. I just have a few general comments, if I may, as regards in the past couple of days, yesterday and today. You know, there's been a lot of concepts presented as regards on the results-based approach, PCM and the logical framework, obviously, stakeholder analysis, partnerships, budgeting, the CN form, and everything else what assessors are looking for. But I would say to the potential applicants, it's not rocket science, this at all. So please don't be afraid of it, in that so many people have gone before you, so many organizations have been successful in this. And don't forget the questions: why, who, what, where, how much, when, what if, and what happens afterwards. And this will be a steadying concepts for you as regards if you think of these, because then I'm sure all of the relevant concepts are fitting within these. So when we think of the why are you intending to apply for this call? Why are you interested? I assume you have a project idea clearly within your scope of expertise, or if not, you'll certainly be able to get the skills and experience fairly quickly from within the organization or from other organizations. Okay, and it's a project idea that's going to add value to your organization, to the target groups and beneficiaries. And it should be an idea that's going to make a difference responding to a clear problem or problems. All right. So once you have these in mind and you provide the good justification for the proposed investment and it's clearly relevant to the call, then I think you're starting on the right path. As regards on the who, you will consider, okay, can I implement my project idea alone? You will think of the technical aspects and the financing viewpoints. And you'll think if there is a need for other organizations, a need for partnerships. You'd also think of what human resources are needed for project implementation. But now, of course, maybe for some organizations, you'll be thinking of someone who's going to help you with a concept note and full application, of course, as well. In relation to the what, or the development of the project idea, okay, you're thinking of the objectives, the smart results, activities, and benefits, for whom. And of course, the overriding aspect is on the quality side. So you're thinking of the quality attributes of all of the expected results as well. Let's move on to what if. So you're thinking of constraints and the uncertainties and the risks. And you must think of these now, of course, at the outset as well. As regards on the where they're going to be implemented, what you have discussed finished. Okay, you recognize I don't have any funds, no possibility to continue activities, move on to another project, or something different, that you really carefully consider sustainability right now, ensuring at least some activities can be continued in the future. Don't forget as well, project sustainability is linked to institutional sustainability as well. So you'll be thinking of the wider aspects of fundraising and other issues, right, for volunteers, interns, everything else, maybe new institutional arrangements, etc. And of course, you have the how and the how much and the when. So the how as regards on your methodology, and the how much and the when. Clearly, you're going to be thinking of your action plan and a budget. As hopefully has been mentioned to you, right, the contracting authority now does not really consider time extensions at all. So my advice is to be quite conservative in project duration. Okay. And in any case, what generally happens at the project or the contract preparation stage, the contracting authority often adds on a few months. But in these kind of projects, of course, that has consequences as well, right, on the budget side, since the human resources is linked in with this as well. So there are a few things to consider when you're drafting your concept note. And Alexandra, right, in the various slides has presented lots of tips and experience, you know, from previous assessments, feedback from assessors and everything else. And I would urge you certainly to review these as well before you draft a concept note. So again, just a few tips, right, to reinforce the message. Clearly state the relevance to the call, right? You'd be surprised about the number of concept notes in grant schemes in various sectors, right, that have a suspect relevance and are not clearly linked to objectives or priorities of a specific call. So please do that. As regards in the needs assessment, right, justification, please make reference, right, to any consultations you may have undertaken now as regards in the proposal development with affected groups, or if it's surveys or research or whatever. So again, you need a really good problem identification, clearly showing the need for the project, how it's responding, okay, to the needs in the local environment, the local context. You will see in some of the slides that there's been big issues in the past in relation to target groups and beneficiaries. So it's quite important to clearly understand the differences between the two groups, okay, and then to carefully consider, right, your target groups and beneficiaries, and also, of course, right, to elaborate on these with quantitative indicators as well as regards on numbers. I cannot overemphasize the importance of objectives, structured objectives, right? And that doesn't mean, of course, just a listing of results and activities leading into 6 or 7 objectives. Not at all. So for specific objectives, you're looking at a small number, 2 or 3, really focused, right? And they are objectives and nothing else. As regards on your results, you have done before in the workshop as regards the need for smart results, also the need for providing information on other initiatives, how the project will fit into this environment, ensuring no duplication, right? And again, if, as Alexandra has mentioned in relation to this case study now, it's just important, right, to have a structured presentation following the PCM format that you have previously discussed. So these are just some of the things. So again, as I say, it's not rocket science, and certainly both the GST and Civic Space are here for you always to answer any question that we can. So that's just my comments as regards coming back to the case study, why it's not so good. And then if maybe to understand the case study, you can answer these questions to yourself. Is there a problem with the why? Is there a problem with the who and the what and the where and the how and the how much and everything else? And that may help you then to differentiate between good and bad. Okay, that's me for the moment anyway.
Thanks, Michael, for these inputs as well. Were there any other perhaps comments in relation to this case study? If not, there were a couple of questions that were submitted in the meantime. One related to the I'll share the screen again. Title of the action. Perhaps this is something that we didn't elaborate. Furthermore, yeah, I mean, in this part where it says title of the action, you are writing the title of your project. Yeah, for sure, this is the case. Sometimes it could be misleading, using of this word action. It's grant actions, it's grant project. So whenever you see in the guidelines as well the word action, it relates to a project, just not to get confused with these little things. But yeah, in the title of the action you will write the title of your project. Then there were a couple of more questions. I will try to go back to the chat to see them. I saw that a person asked about whether to tabulate target groups. They're planning to do, I guess, a research, and then that was asked whether to tabulate the target group representatives. I'm not really sure whether you're referring to a research that you're planning to do, whether to the concept note presentation. But yeah, it's always a good idea to present all the target groups that are going to be the target groups of your particular project in the very beginning of the concept notes. Tabulation of the research data shouldn't be really elaborated extensively. As we said, there's only a couple of pages that you can use to describe the description of your action and the design of your action. So I'm not really sure that you should go into such length, but then again, present all the parts of the target groups that your project will be targeting. And then there were a couple of questions as well in relation to the research that someone is planning to do on different residential buildings. Is it necessary to give explicit details on each building in section 1.1 description of the action? I would say again, no. I mean, if you can fit into these 2 pages, certainly it would help, but I think that simply presenting a typology of these residential buildings would be sufficient. Perhaps I'm having a problem understanding the meaning of the question, but I would say that simply presenting a typology of the buildings would be enough. There's an important question also in relation to references list. It could be a case that you dealt with different types of calls for proposals. I sense that maybe it's horizon or scientific projects where this is hugely important to present the reference list. This particular template doesn't include any reference list as such. There is no such part in the template. Of course, if it fits into 5 pages, you can always include it. You can use footnotes to explain the references as well, but there is no such part of the concept note where the reference list should be presented. And then there was a kind of like an appeal from a participant calling upon all of us to have the assessors being more open to alternative projects rather than conventional type of projects. It's a little bit of lobbying, I guess, towards cultural projects and films and media. But we are not assessing projects right now. I think that the call is quite inclusive and open. It also includes media, it also includes social inclusion. There is a certain added value element that also speaks of COVID-19 consequences. In this elaborate question, there is a mention of that as well. When you read the guidelines, you will also see that. So, I mean, we appreciate the appeal, of course, and I think that the call is inclusive as to also include what we could explain as alternative projects. In fact, I mean, it's quite inclusive when you compare it to other calls for proposals. Lots of priorities, very open specific objectives, and then also a possibility to have smaller scale projects and larger scale projects. It's not really a case, I would say, that you're very fortunate to be given such an opportunity. I mean, the entire civil society sector in the northern part of Cyprus. And then there was a question, does the nationality of lead applicant make a difference? We discussed this a little bit yesterday. Please go through guidelines, eligibility criteria for the lead applicants. I wouldn't say that the nationality of a lead applicant makes a significant difference in any form, sort of whatever, but if you do not fulfill the eligibility criteria of the call, you could have the best proposal in the world. Still, this is administrative criteria, you will be rejected because of the eligibility criteria. So go through them and study them, but if you are fulfilling eligibility criteria, this is yes or no, kind of like an assessment. You will be assessed only against the questions that are presented in the evaluation grids for the concept notes, and then later on for the full application forms, and you will see that there is no any mention of nationality there. There is also a question as to whether we will share a good example of a concept note. We opted for these workshops not to do this because what is a good example will be determined by you. You know, it's really, really bad to use this armchair approach and then say, okay, what worked in some other places could work here as well, and just give you a blueprint that you think, oh, this is the best way, I will just use this, change a couple of words, and so on and so forth. Answering all these questions, which Michael also mentioned, and thank you for that. That was really comprehensive and kind of like a summary of important issues, would make your concept notes good. So we opted to share with you something which we regard as, let's be, you know, like not so politically correct and say bad example, not so good example, for you to learn from it, and then to see what common traps and mistakes could happen in the preparation of concept notes, and then to learn from that, and then to have our own best concept notes developed on this call for proposal. I think that I answered all the questions that were sent. There were some obviously technical errors where people said that they didn't receive some documents that were shared with you yesterday. It could be that you didn't share with us your emails, or that there was some technical error in the sharing of these documents. But again, we will send all the documents to all participants at the end of this day as well, so that you will have the PowerPoint presentations, and then also in a couple of days a recording will be shared as well, so that you can remind yourself of these parts that you would like to maybe revisit once again, including this PowerPoint presentation as well that was shared today. If there are any other questions, we have a couple of more minutes to discuss them now. And as you remember, based on our agenda that we presented yesterday, we have a session also on PADOR and prospect, technical matters, but also hugely important for you to successfully kind of grasp all these details that are related to technical matters when it comes to registration in PADOR and in prospect. So yeah, we can use a couple of minutes more if any questions are there, or if I perhaps, because you really had a lot of questions today, if I perhaps missed to answer any of those that were asked. If not, we can perhaps then move to the session on PADOR and prospect. And there will be some time at the end of today's workshop also to, you know, answer any questions that perhaps come up in the meantime. So yeah, I mean, Chidem, Nilay, my colleagues from GST, perhaps then you can take over and and lead us through this infamous abbreviations called PADOR and prospect, and explain to our participants what is this about and how to understand these databases. From my side, thank you very much. I will remain here, and as I said, at the end of the workshop, and if any other questions, we can also go through them.
Yes, thank you, Alexandra. I'm Nilay from EU Grant Support Team. I'll try to provide you some information on PADOR and prospect I would like to also mention that we will arrange help desks if you need some further one-on-one support on registration to PADOR, and later on, well before hopefully the deadline, we can also help you to upload your documents on Prospect. So what are these two platforms that we are talking about? PADOR is the potential applicant data online registration. All the applicants, especially in this stage, whilst you are preparing your concept notes, before the deadline, all the lead applicants are obligated to have the registration to PADOR. For the co-applicants, it can be until the submission of the full application form. So we advise you to have your organization registered well before 16th of October, especially if you are going to submit a proposal as a lead applicant. So once you have your registration, you will receive a Europe 8 ID number, and this number is going to be used as the reference throughout all the process. So how do we do this? How do we register to PADOR? Of course, if previously you have submitted any proposals and you do have a Europe 8 ID number, you don't need to try and register again, and also the system does not let you anyway. So if you have a PADOR registration, you just need to update it. You need to provide all the updated information there, and that's it. And if you are a new organization, or if you are a natural person representing an organization and you don't have any Europe 8 ID number, I will walk you through how to get this registration now. So as soon as you enter PADOR on Google, these links appear. I hope that everyone is seeing my screen at the moment. And then, yes, this page appears. So we scroll down and it asks you to log in. If you're a new user, first of all, you need to have an EU login account. And this is where we can do this. First I need to log out, of course, sorry. So here it says create an account. And now you are able to create an account here, first of all in EU login, which then you will use this account to create a registration on PADOR. So let's say you have already done this, and PADOR requires you to have at least 2 users. So at least 2 different individuals, or one in the name of the organization and the other one a personal, a private email. There has to be at least 2 users assigned to PADOR. So this first initial step has to be repeated for 2 users. Yes, let's say you have done this already. I already have my password. So yeah, you got your account, only you log in, and now you are logging in to PADOR. Yes, let's enter the password. And this is PADOR. First of all, the system obligates you to search for your organization so that it is sure that it's not a duplication of registrations. So you are trying to create an organization now. If you do not do the search step first, it doesn't allow you to create. It doesn't allow you to press this button. So let's do a search. The location of action is Cyprus, so we enter Cyprus. It has to be, the organization has to be established in Cyprus. Let's search for this organization name. And yes, it gives us no results. Then the system allows us to create a new PADOR profile. Okay, this it already exists apparently. Let's try something else. Yep. So now we are in Pador and we are going to create our profile. As you can see, there are 4 different sections to be filled out. But of course, as this is a restricted call, you don't have to do everything now at the outset. So whilst we are going to fill these sections out, I'm going to mention what is required in this stage at concept note stage and what is required later at full application stage. So initially, you have to fill out all the sections here: organization name, emails, phone number, addresses. Then in this section, the legal data is required. Here, of course, when we look at the eligibility criteria of the applicants, we see different types of organizations regarding their legal establishment. So under lot 1 and lot 2, only under lot 2, only those organizations which are legally established, which have legal entities can apply. But under lot 1, it can be a legal person, it can be an entity without legal personality, or as a novelty, a natural person representing a civil society organization, an entity, can also apply. So here, I mean, it's better to differentiate between those potential applicants. So if the organization is legally created, it has a legal personality, we require to upload the statutes, articles of association, whatever is the legal document of establishment of this particular organization, because it can be like unions, chambers, associations. It can be different organizations. So the relevant document of establishment should be uploaded here. Then we have to choose the legal type. It has to be private and public law body in this case. Then we have to choose the legal form of the establishment of the entity. This drop-down list is in Greek. So in case of institutions, ITRIMA can be chosen. In case of unions, SOMETIO can be chosen. If you're not sure or if you're not legally established, you can just choose unknown. Here under category, there is a drop-down list in English, and you can also choose the type of organization that you are. Under this call for proposals, you should not be a profit-making entity. So in all cases, it should be no. NGO, yes. In all cases, the applicants under CS7 call for proposal should be an NGO. Here, legal entity file, this is required later in the process, but the system, Pador system, does not let you to proceed if you don't fill out the information or if you don't upload documents where it is start. These are the obligatory sections. So in order to be able to proceed, we need to trick the system basically. So at this stage, we can just upload a blank document here and just proceed, because this will be required later in the first stage. So we are proceeding. Yes, again, if you are an established association, you might have your VAT number, your registration documents. You can easily upload those. If you're not if you're an entity without a legal personality, then if, for instance, let's say you have already applied, you made an application to be registered. If you have such a document, or if you have any, let's say, informal minutes of meeting of your board, you can upload those. But once you upload the document here, you need to provide information in these sections as well. So you need to be consistent in this section. In case if you don't have anything to upload here, or if you are a natural person representing an informal organization and an initiative, it is required that the ID, a copy of the ID and the ID number of the representative is uploaded here, and here a bank account of the representative is uploaded here. So, because the thing is, usually the natural persons are actually not required to make any registration on PADOR. They don't need to have a profile in PADOR. And those natural persons, let's say there is the scholarship program of the EU, and different kinds of support, and they are not usually required to do this. But in our case, under this CS7 call for proposals, what is required from the natural persons, or why the natural person can apply, is certainly a bit different than the usual. Here, the natural person, representing an organization which don't have a legal personality under the local, legal regulations, on the condition that the representative of this applicant, of this entity, can prove that they have the capacity to undertake legal obligations on behalf of the entity, can apply. And they also need to offer the same financial and operational guarantees equivalent to those of the legal persons, those of those entities which can provide the similar financial and operational capacity. So in case of the natural persons representing entities, initiatives, they also need to show that they can provide, they do have the financial and operational capacity to run the project, and they can be legally responsible to represent, they can legally represent these entities. That's why here we need to, first of all, here these natural persons need to upload their ID copy, and here they need to provide a bank account. Of course, under CS, it's not like it is scrutinized under other grant schemes where profit-making entities, establishments are, submitting proposals. The financial capacity will be assessed differently than those, profit-making organizations. So you don't have to worry about, that is going to be a problem, that, you are holding a bank account here. And this does not have to be the bank, later on you will see that there is a financial identification form required, in which you need to give the details of ideally a euro account where the grant is going to be deposited, but this is later under stage 3. So let's proceed. Here you need to choose the target groups of the entity. There's an exhaustive list almost, let's say. It can be students, it can be women, it can be young people. Then you can view the target groups of your entity. Also, the sectors under which this entity or the initiative is operating or will be operating should be chosen from this list. Let's say it is engaging in environmental activities. You can choose, as our target group is students. I'm guessing that this organization is engaging in environmental education training and environmental research perhaps. So these are selected. Here, the system asks you to provide the number of staff of the organization, let's say less than 10. Here you can provide additional information about the entity. I would suggest that especially if you, if a natural person is applying as representing an entity, it would be good to provide some information here. So it's clear that you know, this natural person is representing the entity, and at least briefly the activities or the objectives of this organization is provided. Then you save and continue. I'm not doing that because it's not going to let me now, as I have not filled out all the start sections. So let's move to the second sheet of PADOR. As you can see here, first of all, you need to choose if you are a lead applicant or a co-applicant. At this stage, during concept note, you don't have to provide actual information here. Let's say you are a lead applicant. You can just put 0 and upload some documents if it's required, if it starts, and then you can proceed. For instance, here, the 5th document is required. As I mentioned, this is the document that you will provide your bank account for the grant, but it's not required. Now, please just upload a blank document here so that you can proceed. Audit report is not required from beneficiaries because the European Commission assigns contracts and assigns external auditors for this, so you don't have to provide any information here. And so right now, at the concept note stage, you will just skip this because also the financial year, I mean, before you will be asked to submit your full application form, you will not have the most recent financial information and documents. So it's also better if you wait, and you are not required to provide information here now anyway. So you can skip. And if you are a co-applicant, anyway, such financial information is required from you to provide. So as you can see, you can't enter anything anyway. So this is the financial section. Let's move on to the user list. As I mentioned, you need to have at least 2 users in this section for the system to allow you to proceed. It's quite important that these 2 emails, at least 2 emails, are regularly checked, because there isn't such a system that you will be called up and you will be informed that you have been successful with your concept note. All the information is going to be provided. You will going to receive notifications via PADOR and Prospect. So it's crucial that the emails that you are going to assign here can be accessible and are regularly checked. So please provide at least 2 emails here. And then you can also assign different roles to each user. I mean, one of them, if they have the sign profile capacity, they can go through the whole process, or they might just, you know, you can assign them limited capacities here. And then once all the required information at this concept note stage or later at the financial full application stage are uploaded, you will need to tick these boxes and sign. If you don't sign, your profile will not be created, and you will need to go back and re-enter or carry on from where you left, and then sign to create your profile. So basically, this is PADOR. This is how you create the profile. Once you have done this and you sign, here in this section, Eurobate ID, your ID number will appear. And from then on, you are going to use that specific number for your proposal. Yes, once we have done this, let's move on to prospect. So prospect is the platform where you're going to submit your proposal and concept notes in this case, first of all. So hand-delivered applications are not applicable. They are not going to be accepted. All the concept notes and full applications have to be uploaded on Pador. How do we do this then? Let's see. First of all, you need to find the relevant call. Let's search for that. So you can see all the open calls at the moment. We are searching what we have open in Cyprus, and here it comes. We click apply. Now you need to choose whether you're going to apply to lot 1 or lot 2. Let's choose lot 1. Yes, as you can see in prospect, now we have 5 different sections to go through. If you review the concept note template, you will see that the same information is also, same sections is also present on the form. But as all the applications are accepted via prospect, you need to fill out this online on prospect, not on the hard copy form, just here. So, does the applicant have an ID number? Yes. You will add your ID number here. Name of the organization, established country, Cyprus. Addresses, all the contact information. Then the information of the contact person will be entered here. And addresses as required. You then save and continue. It's as straightforward as that. Then we'll move on to project section. And here you will provide very crucial information. The title of the action, the title of your project, the language of the proposal needs to be English in this case, the amount of EU contribution that you are requesting, the grant amount this is, and the percentage of the contribution that you are requesting. And then the system will automatically calculate the estimate budget for you. So here, what we need to be careful about is the thresholds for this call for proposals. So if you are applying under lot 1, the minimum grant amount is indicated as 30,000 and the maximum is 60,000. If you are applying under lot 2, it is from 75,000 to 320,000 euro. So it needs to be something within that range. And also regarding the percentage of the contribution that you can request, the range provided, the acceptable ranges between 60% to 95%. So you can ask for as much as 95% of your budget to be contributed by the EU. And this means that you will be contributing by 5% of your budget. So then the system will calculate it for you. Regarding the duration that you need to indicate here, it is also lot specific. So if you are applying under lot 1, it can be between 6 and 36 months. And if you are applying under lot 2, it is between 24 and 36 months. Of course, we advise you to be generous and realistic with this, with the time frame of your project. And then you need to indicate the location of action of the project. And in this case, it has to be Cyprus, although some activities can be undertaken overseas. Then you save and continue. Let's move on to co-applicants. as I mentioned earlier, currently at the concept note stage, you don't need to fill this out. But of course, if you have already established your partnership network, you can add them. But latest, please do add them before the submission of full applications. And this is the heart of prospect. This is where you will upload your documents. At this stage, as you can see, you are only required to submit the concept note here, and there is a declaration required from the applicant. You will need to provide that now. These declarations, they have different templates. Please be careful about that. The declaration that the lead applicant needs to sign now is different from the declaration that the lead applicant or other applicants will need to sign and upload during the full application stage. So you can find all of these annexes, these templates in the guidelines. They are annexed. These templates are annexed to the guidelines. You can find them there. So as I mentioned, at this stage, you only need to the lead applicant needs to upload the concept note and the declaration, their own declaration here. And then save and continue. Next section gives us an overview of the information and the documents that we have provided. So whatever you have provided to the system, it will come as a summary, as an overview here, and you can review the information. You can check if you have uploaded all the documents required. And then you can go to the last section, which is submission section. And once you arrive here, you have to make sure that all the information is correct, realistic, and all the documents required, their correct versions have been uploaded, because once you click this button, there's no going back. It will be submitted and corrections cannot be made. So please make sure that up to this stage, before clicking the button, everything is as you want them to be. All the correct information and correct versions of documents are uploaded. And that's that. If you face any problems, there is a help desk email that you can seek for help, or as I have mentioned, you can just call us, have an appointment, and we can try to help you both with PADO registration and also uploading of prospect. So that's basically that. Thank you very much for listening us.